This is a work of fiction inspired by real events in the history of American slavery. It is created for entertainment, reflection, empathy, and personal growth. It does not endorse or glorify violence, crime, or revenge, but seeks to honor memory, resilience, and the ongoing struggle for justice and dignity. On the night of July 3, 1822, Charleston, South Carolina pulsed with anticipation. Streets thrummed with parades, taverns overflowed with patriotic songs, and plantation masters raised their glasses high in praise of liberty. Yet while the city dreamed of fireworks, another kind of fire was being prepared in secret, one that would not illuminate the sky in celebration, but choke it in smoke and ash. In the grand kitchen of the Carrington Plantation, where silver platters gleamed and roasted meat sent their fragrance wafting toward a ballroom of silk and laughter, a woman worked in silence. Her name was Beatrice, the cook whose hands seasoned every feast, whose mastery of the hearth fed her oppressors until they were fat with arrogance. To them she was invisible, just another shadow moving between fire and flour. But Beatrice carried within her a furnace no master could control. For years she had swallowed grief like bitter broth, seasoning it with rage, stirring it with patience. And on this Independence Eve, while America prepared to celebrate its freedom, Beatrice prepared to redefine it. The night would end, not with music and toasts, but with screams behind locked doors, a plantation ablaze like a cursed torch, and a cook whose name would echo in whispers of both fear and reverence. Before we continue with the video, drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time it is over there, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The Carrington Plantation stood like a stage set to deceive the eye, white columns gleaming under the moonlight, verandas draped in ivy, and windows tall as cathedral arches glowing with candlelight. To a traveler passing by, it might have looked like paradise itself, a kingdom built on elegance and prosperity. Inside, the dining hall was alive with abundance. Long tables sagged beneath roasted pigs stuffed with herbs, bowls of candied peaches glistening in syrup, and crystal glasses filled with wine that had crossed the ocean in oak barrels. Gentlemen in polished boots and embroidered coats clinked their glasses, their laughter echoing like brass horns. Wives in silks the color of emeralds and sapphires swept across the marble floors, their pearls flashing in the flicker of candelabras. They raised toasts to liberty, to God, to their nation's independence, never once tasting the bitter irony in their mouths. Just beyond those glittering halls, the air changed. Past the grand staircase, through the back corridors, the light dimmed and the smell shifted from lavender oil to sweat, smoke, and mildew. In the slave quarters, walls sagged with damp, straw pallets sagged beneath tired bodies, and silence stretched like a taut rope. Children curled into their mothers, wide-eyed, listening to the faint strains of violin music drifting from the big house, songs they would never dance to. The crackle of laughter from the master's hall seemed to mock the stillness outside, each note a reminder of chains. In the kitchen, Beatrice moved between worlds. Her apron bore stains, her hands carried burns, but her presence carried more than labor. It carried memory. Every strike of the knife on wood, every rattle of iron pans against brick hearth, sounded to her like drums of war no guest could hear. The scents of cinnamon, smoke, and roasting meat swirled in the air, but beneath them lingered something sharper, the scent of inevitability. For while the masters drank their wine and praised their freedom, the walls themselves seemed to whisper that another kind of celebration was coming, one written not in fireworks but in flame. Beatrice was not born in the kitchen of the Carrington Plantation. Her story began further north along the banks of the Santee River, where the marshes hummed with insects and the air hung heavy with the smell of rice fields. Her earliest memories were not of fire, but of water. Muddy streams where her father showed her how to trap fish with nothing but his hands, the sound of frogs croaking through summer nights, and her mother's low songs sung in a tongue older than America itself. Her father was a man of great laughter. His voice could rise above cicadas and thunder alike, filling the air with a joy that seemed indestructible. But when Beatrice was 5, the laughter ended. She watched him shackled and led away, sold south to pay a master's debt. He turned once, only once, to look back at his family. His eyes burned not with tears, but with a promise, a silent vow that his daughter would remember. That single look etched itself deeper than any scar. Beatrice never forgot. Her mother became her teacher. She passed down knowledge older than the plantation itself: how to cool a fever with bitter leaf tea, how to grind okra into a paste that healed wounds, how to stir gumbo thick enough to stretch scraps into survival. She told Beatrice that food was more than sustenance. It was memory. Every spice carried a story. Every simmering pot held whispers of ancestors. A good cook, she said, doesn't just feed the belly, she feeds the soul. But life on the plantation was not kind. Beatrice's back bent under chores before she was 10. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled, fetched water until her arms burned. At 12, she was brought into the kitchen, her hands blistering over hoe. Tea coals as she plucked chickens and ground spices. Yet while others groaned at the endless labor, Beatrice studied. She watched how the mistress demanded her wine sweet, how the master grew clumsy with too much brandy, how the overseer feared shadows when the oil lamps burned low. She memorized every weakness with the patience of a hunter. Tragedy was her constant companion. One by one, pieces of her family were taken. The sharpest wound came with her brother Isaiah. He was only 9 when the master sold him to cover a gambling loss. That morning she braided his hair and teased him for being restless. By evening he was gone, carried off by a man with cold eyes and hands that smelled of ink and coins. Beatrice never heard from him again. Nights afterward, she lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying the sound of his sobs fading down the road. From then on, silence became her armor. She did not scream when lashes cracked across her back. She did not weep when overseers spat their orders. She tucked her grief into the folds of her apron, kneaded it into dough, stirred it into stews. But when she whispered to her mother in the quarters, her voice carried fire. "One day," she said, "I will cook them something they cannot swallow." Her mother's eyes filled with fear. "Child, fire burns both hands." "Then let it burn," Beatrice replied, her jaw tight, her gaze steady. The years transformed her. By her 20s, Beatrice's reputation had grown beyond the Carrington estate. Guests marveled at her tables laden with golden cornbread, her pies sweet as any Parisian bakery. They praised her skill, calling her the jewel of the kitchen, never realizing jewels cut deep. The masters boasted of her talent as though it were theirs, as though her gift was proof of their refinement rather than her resilience. To Beatrice, every feast was a rehearsal. Each banquet became a study in arrogance. How men leaned back in their chairs, drunk on wine and entitlement. How women preened before mirrors while enslaved girls stood behind them, hollow-eyed. She saw not elegance but vulnerability, not luxury but rot. Her heart catalogued each cruelty like ingredients in a recipe: the lash across a boy's back for dropping a plate, the forced silence of a girl dragged behind barn doors, the endless lies of freedom promised but never granted. Her skill in the kitchen sharpened alongside her vision. She learned to control fire as though it were an extension of her will, stoking it hotter, coaxing it lower, feeding it breath until it roared or whispering it into embers. She understood that fire was both creation and destruction, both bread and ash. In her hands, it was a servant. In her heart, it was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. By then, Beatrice's silence had become legend among the enslaved. She never raised her voice, never begged, never allowed the masters the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside her stillness pulsed a steady drumbeat, the same rhythm her father's laughter once carried. A vow, a memory, a reckoning. And so, while Charleston glittered with wealth, while the Carringtons believed themselves untouchable, Beatrice moved between worlds. She fed them with one hand while clutching her fury with the other. Every dish she served, every platter she carried, was not just sustenance but rehearsal. For she knew a truth the masters never imagined. Kitchens were not only places of nourishment, they were also places of fire. And fire, once freed, could consume an empire. The summer of 1822 was thick with heat. Even the magnolia blossoms seemed weary, their sweet perfume soured by humidity. For weeks, Beatrice moved through the Carrington plantation like any other day, her face calm, her pace steady. Yet every step she took was measured, every glance calculated. She had begun preparing for something larger than survival. In the kitchen, she hid her tools in plain sight. A rag dipped in lamp oil, rolled tight, tucked beneath a sack of flour. A candle shaved short, disguised as kitchen refuse. Small bundles of kindling set aside near the woodpile, where no one noticed one bundle more or less. Nothing grand, nothing to draw suspicion. Only patience. only pieces. She understood that fire, like revenge, required care. It could not be rushed. Each day, she sharpened her mind as carefully as she chopped vegetables. She memorized the architecture of the house, the drafty corners, the wooden beams dry from years of sun, the velvet curtains that would ignite like tinder. She knew the doors that stuck when closed, the hallways that funneled smoke. She studied the rhythm of her oppressors, their habits, their weaknesses, until they became predictable as the ticking of a clock. Edmund Carrington, the master, was the cruelest of all. He carried himself as though God had carved the world for his pleasure. He believed pain was a tool of order, once branding a boy across the shoulder for dropping a jug of milk. His pride was his blindness. He trusted his house as a fortress. To Beatrice, he was already fuel. Eleanor Carrington, his wife, was no gentler. Her tongue could flay skin as surely as any whip. She delighted in humiliation, ridiculing enslaved women for their looks, their scars, their very existence. Vanity was her crown, and mirrors her altar. Beatrice had watched her clutch jewels even when her children cried with fever. Eleanor's arrogance would keep her clinging to treasures when she should have run. Then there was Holt, the overseer. His hands were as filthy as his words. He preyed on young women in the quarters, promising leniency, then discarding them like scraps. His cruelty was intimate, personal, cowardly. Beatrice despised him most of all. He feared the dark, slept with a lantern beside his bed. To him, fire would not be enemy, but executioner. And beyond them, the guests, Charleston elites gathered for independence celebrations, men who spoke of liberty as though it were their birthright, while sipping wine carried on the backs of the enslaved. They laughed at sermons of equality and left children in chains. Their hypocrisy was the most flammable of all. Beatrice's plan was a symphony of precision. On Independence Eve, she would let fire speak in the only language masters understood, fear. The kitchen would be the heart, the spark. Curtains would carry the flame to the dining hall. Smoke would choke the ballroom where laughter roared loudest. Locked doors, swollen with heat, would trap them inside their own fortress. Night after night, as she prepared meals, she rehearsed in silence. She practiced striking flint in shadows, timed the spread of a small flame across oiled cloth, tested how long smoke took to rise thick enough to blind. Each test was disguised as routine. Embers shifting in the hearth, coals stirred with unusual care. No one looked closely at the cook. They never did. She kept her silence, her calm, her patience. Repetition steadied her. She did not run. She did not shout. She only waited. The fire would come when it was ready, and she would be its hand. On July 3rd, the plantation swelled with guests. Wagons rattled in, spilling men in finery and women in lace. Servants rushed with trunks and parasols, the air filled with chatter about parades and liberty. In the kitchen, Beatrice bent over her pots as though nothing were amiss, but in her mind, every ingredient was weighted with meaning. The aroma of roasting meat curled through the halls. Glasses clinked, fiddles struck their first notes. Above it all, the masters preened, oblivious. None of them noticed the faint scent of oil beneath the perfume of cinnamon. None of them guessed that the very hearths they trusted to feed them were now primed to consume them. For Beatrice, the hours moved like slow drumbeats, steady, inevitable. Every strike of knife against cutting board, every hiss of fat on iron was a countdown, not to their feast, but to their ruin. The stage was set. The kindling waited. The fire, patient and ancient, was ready to rise. The night unfurled like a velvet curtain. July 3rd, 1822, Independence Eve. The plantation house pulsed with music, violins and fiddles swirling with drunken voices. Guests raised their glasses high, shouting toasts about liberty, freedom, the glory of America. Fireworks cracked in the distance, little bursts of color lighting the Charleston sky. Inside the kitchen, Beatrice's hands moved steadily, calm, certain. The heat from the hearth pressed against her skin, sweat rolling down her back. Yet her eyes did not waver. She struck flint against steel once, twice, and caught the spark on the oil-soaked rag she had hidden. A tiny flame licked alive, no larger than a candle wick. She fed it patiently, carefully, as though cradling an infant born of vengeance. The rag hissed, smoldered, then flared. Beatrice laid it gently beneath the wooden pantry shelves where sacks of flour and dried corn leaned heavy. The oil spread its tongue quickly, and the wood drank it in. She turned, lit another, slipped it beneath the hem of the velvet curtain near the kitchen doorway. The fabric caught with a sound like paper tearing, soft at first, then insistent. Above, laughter rose, feet stamped in rhythm to music. The demons dressed as gentlemen danced, their boots striking polished wood as though pounding nails into their own coffins. Beatrice stepped lightly from room to room, each motion practiced. A candlestick tipped here, a lamp brushed too close to drapes there, every gesture invisible, every gesture irreversible. The first smoke curled upward faint, blending with the scents of roasted meat and cinnamon. No one noticed. Beatrice moved like a shadow, her face calm as stone. Then the flames grew teeth. The pantry roared, flour sacks bursting like gunpowder, coating the fire in white dust that made it explode brighter. The curtain blazed, dropping sparks onto the rug, which carried the inferno toward the hall. A guest sniffed the air above the violins. "Do you smell?" he began, but his words drowned in laughter. By the time he rose, smoke already licked the ceiling. Panic struck like a whip, shouts broke out, chairs scraped, glass shattered. The music faltered into chaos as smoke rolled thick and black, swallowing the chandeliers in choking veils. Women screamed, skirts snagging on furniture as they stumbled for doors that swelled shut in the heat. Men hammered at windows sealed by years of neglect, the glass refusing to break until it burst inward with a rain of sparks. Edmund Carrington bellowed orders, his voice swallowed by the crackling roar. His polished boots slipped on spilled wine, red liquid mingling with ash so that it looked like blood. Eleanor clutched her jewelry box to her chest, pearls scattering as she fell to her knees, coughing, crawling toward a mirror that reflected only flame. The overseer Holt burst into the kitchen, face slick with sweat, lantern clutched tight. His eyes widened at Beatrice standing calm amid the storm. "What have you done?" he wheezed. But before he could move, the pantry behind him exploded with a deafening boom. Fire wrapped him whole, his lantern bursting as he screamed, his body thrashing like a moth pinned to flame, his screams drowned in the inferno. Beatrice did not flinch. She walked past him as calmly as if she were carrying supper to the dining hall. The fire leapt higher, ravenous, devouring walls, racing up staircases like a predator finally freed from its cage. The grand chandelier above the ballroom groaned, then fell in a shower of crystal and fire, crushing 2 men beneath its weight. Their blood and wine spread together, indistinguishable. Children of enslaved mothers huddled in the quarters outside watched the sky glow red, their eyes wide as the heavens themselves seemed to burn. To them, the roaring blaze was no terror, it was deliverance, justice given form. Inside, Edmund clawed toward the front door, smoke pouring from his mouth, eyes bulging. He coughed, stumbled, fell to his knees. Beatrice stood in the doorway, silhouetted by firelight, her expression steady. He met her eyes, his lips shaping curses, but no sound came. His throat was full of smoke, his lungs full of death. The master who had branded flesh, who had spoken of liberty while binding others in chains, collapsed at the feet of the woman he had called nothing more than a servant. Beatrice did not touch him. She did not speak. She simply turned and walked away, her figure swallowed by the night as the plantation behind her screamed, groaned, and fell into ash. The fire consumed everything: paintings, silks, ledgers, portraits, pride. Blood and smoke rose together, a cursed offering to the sky. The plantation that had stood for decades crumbled in a single night, its grandeur reduced to ember and memory. Beatrice walked calmly into the fields, the glow behind her staining the horizon red. Each step was steady, each breath was free. The demons had been fed to the fire, the ancestors had been answered. Morning came with smoke still curling above the Carrington plantation, where once marble pillars had stood. Only blackened skeletons jutted against the sky. The air stank of charred silk, scorched flesh, and wet ash where neighbors had tried to douse the inferno too late. Charleston awoke to whispers carried on every street corner. An Independence Eve feast turned to funeral pyres. Bodies were pulled from the wreckage. Edmund Carrington, blackened beyond recognition, his jeweled buttons melted into his chest. Eleanor sprawled across the ballroom floor, pearls fused into her skin. Holt, the overseer, a twisted husk near the kitchen hearth. Of the guests, many lay smothered in corners, their finery unrecognizable beneath soot. What remained of the house was nothing but ruin, its grandeur swallowed in a single night. And yet Beatrice did not run. She did not hide. She moved through the smoking fields with her back straight, her eyes steady. When the patrols found her, they expected terror, pleas, excuses. Instead, she looked at them as if she had been waiting. "I cooked for them all my life," she said calmly. "Last night, I cooked something different." The city demanded spectacle. Charleston's elites, shaken to their bones, insisted justice be swift and PMS. Ooblik. A tribunal convened, judges sitting stiff as tombstones while crowds pressed in, eager to see the woman who had dared. They called her monster, witch, arsonist. She stood silent through it all, her presence louder than their accusations. Witnesses came forward, voices trembling, testifying to her composure, her steady movements, her absence of fear. The prosecutor thundered that she had committed the devil's work. Beatrice finally spoke, her voice clear, unshaken. "They taught me fire," she said. "Every lash of the whip, every child sold, every night of hunger, they were kindling. I did not bring the flame, I only struck the spark." Gasps rippled through the court. Some spat at the ground, others in the back, enslaved faces peering from shadows, held their breath, hearts pounding with secret awe. The verdict was preordained, guilty on all counts. The punishment, death by hanging. Yet even as the gavel fell, it was not the judges who commanded the room, but Beatrice. She stood like a monument, a woman who had faced her masters, her tormentors, and left them in ashes. The morning of Beatrice's execution dawned bright, as if the heavens themselves wished to deny her the dignity of shadows. The gallows had been built in the town square, rough wood erected like a stage for a grim performance. Crowds gathered early, faces pale with curiosity, fear, or hatred. Mothers lifted their children to see, preachers murmured prayers, and planters whispered about their own houses, their own kitchens, their own cooks. When Beatrice was led forward, chains clinking softly, she walked with the same steady pace she had used when carrying platters of food. There was no tremor in her hands, no faltering in her gaze. The rope swung gently in the breeze, but her eyes fixed on a horizon far beyond the scaffold, as though she saw something the rest could not. The executioner asked if she had final words. She lifted her chin. "You call me wicked," she said, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. "But it was not I who birthed wickedness here. You built it with whips, with chains, with hunger. You taught me fire, and so I returned it to you. My body will hang, but my flame," she paused, steady, "my flame will live where you cannot touch it." The trapdoor fell. The rope snapped taut. Gasps rippled across the square, but Beatrice did not tremble. In death, she was unbroken. That night, in the slave quarters across Charleston, her name passed in whispers. Children huddled around fires, listening to elders murmur. Beatrice lit the night. In kitchens, in fields, in cabins hidden deep in swamps, her story spread like sparks on dry grass. She became a warning and a promise both, a ghost in the rafters, a whisper behind the stove, a hand of the ancestors reminding the living that fear could burn, but so could justice. Among the planters, paranoia spread like rot. They looked at their servants differently, wondered about the hands that stirred their food, the eyes that watched their children. Every flame, every candle seemed a threat. Beatrice was gone from this world, but her fire lived on, restless, uncontainable, eternal. What violence is buried under sugar? What tears were mixed into molasses? What cries became seasoning in the stews of the South? The Carrington Plantation is ash now, but how many others stood untouched, their wealth polished by the labor of broken hands? Beatrice's story is now not just about fire, it is about memory. Memory that cannot be silenced, memory that smolders beneath every monument, every untouched mansion, every celebration of freedom that forgets whose freedom was denied. She did not burn for chaos. She burned for dignity, for the children stolen, for the mothers whipped raw, for the men forced to bow until their backs broke. Her blaze was both vengeance and testimony, a warning to those who believed oppression eternal, and a comfort to those who prayed in silence for justice. Even now, her story lingers, not as smoke in the air, but as a spark in the soul, a reminder that the human spirit pressed down does not vanish. It waits, it endures, and sometimes it rises in flame. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. It really helps the channel keep bringing real stories that never make it into the history books.